Hi, I'm Catherine Kennedy from Concrete Jungle, and welcome to Tree Parenting 101. I'm so happy to be with you today to share all of my experience with choosing and planting fruit trees all around the city. Concrete Jungle is a nonprofit that picks fruit all over the city to donate to local soup kitchens and food pantries. We started by identifying fruit trees all over the city. We have them on a map. There's about 3,700 fruit trees that are just growing wild. Some of them are growing in the cracks in sidewalks, some are in yards, some are in parks. Many of them are planted by the wonderful Trees Atlanta. A lot of these trees are dropping their fruit on the ground and it's just going to waste. So we collect that fruit and give it to folks in need. Unfortunately, Atlanta has an incredibly high food insecurity rate. 18% of adults and 28% of kids in Atlanta are food insecure, which means that a lot of folks are shopping at food pantries. And unfortunately, one of the last things that is available to them at food pantries is fresh fruits and vegetables. And another harsh reality of being food insecure is that you're 2 to 3 times more likely to have chronic disease. And a lot of these diseases are curable or easily alleviated by your diet. These are things like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. But if you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, how are you going to alleviate some of these health problems? So that's kind of where Concrete Jungle comes in, and we're so happy for partnerships with folks like Trees Atlanta who are planting fruit trees and trying to make this city a healthier place for all. And this is also how you guys can help, is by planting a fruit tree in your yard. So I want to start by talking about choosing the site in which you can plant your tree, and then I'll talk a little bit about how to plant your tree, and then I'll give you a quick rundown on all the different types of fruit trees that grow really well in Atlanta. So the first thing to notice is the sun and how it moves across your yard. Ideally, a fruit tree will have about 8 hours of sunlight every day. There are some fruit trees that can tolerate less sun, so I'll let you know about what those trees are later in this presentation. This, like many parts of planting a fruit tree, is going to be a long process. Farming, gardening, just planting one plant is a process of learning your landscape and learning your own ecosystem in which you live. Unfortunately, no two yards in Atlanta are the same. We all live in our own little microclimates that are determined by the other trees, the soil, the way that the wind moves through your yard. So, like I said, we're gonna need to take some time really observing how the light moves through our yard. So this means that you're going to need to check in the morning, check in noon, and check in the evening to see where the sun is in the place that you want to plant your tree. So a place like where I am standing right now, here it is about 4 o'clock and it is dark. So this is probably not a great sign, but I will check in the morning and at noon as well to see how it looks. There's an amazing app that can help you to do this, which I will show you right now. So Lumos helps you to predict how the sun will move across the sky in your yard. It also helps to show when trees are going to be in the way and blocking your light. Say here from 12 to 2 or 3-ish, we're going to have the tree that's going to be blocking the sun, which is prime sunlight hours for our fruit trees. The other cool thing about Lumos is that you can advance the time to see where the sun will be in different seasons. So if we advance it to July, peak growing season, nice and hot, the way our fruit trees like it, we can see that the sun is going to be much, much higher in the sky, and there's going to be many less obstructions for our fruit tree if we plant it in this spot right here. So another thing that you need to consider is water. So how water is moving across your yard, if there's any places that it'll pool, low spots sort of like this down here that are like a ditch, or places where if you're on a slope and water might be running really fast down your slope and might be exposing the roots of your tree. That's totally a possible thing. You can plant a fruit tree on a slope. You just have to be prepared for continually mounding back up the dirt in order to keep the roots from being exposed. One thing I like to do in order to tell kind of how much water is pooling in an area is I like to, at different points in time over a course of a few days, I like to go out and see how much moisture is in the soil. So I will usually take a trowel and go like this and dig, trowel's length down, and I'll see what the soil looks like. So you can see here it's all kind of clumpy. A lot of people like to do the squeeze test where they squeeze it, and if it stays together like that, it means that the soil is pretty moist. If the soil looks like this every single time I come out, that might be too much water, because we want to make sure that our tree roots dry out every now and then. The other thing that we need to consider with water is how easy is it going to be for you to water your fruit trees. If you plant your fruit tree somewhere where you lugging a 5-gallon bucket of water is going to be a real big pain in the butt, that's probably not a good place for you, because you're going to start to resent your fruit tree, and then you guys are going to have a troubled relationship. But you also want to make sure that you can see it somewhere that's close by. So if your leaves are starting to turn yellow because it's not getting enough water, you can actually see it and recognize, like, my baby is crying out for help, and you can go and get it some water. So another thing that we want to analyze about the spot where we've picked to plant our tree is how are the other plants growing around here. And I think this is actually a perfect example. So as you see behind me, there's tons of grass. It looks pretty lush. But then right here in front of me, not a lot of stuff is growing. So if you notice that there's very few plants growing around the spot where you've picked to plant your fruit tree, it's probably not a very good spot to plant your fruit tree. You want to go ahead and go with a spot that has more stuff growing. And yes, it is a pain in the butt to weed grass. It's going to come up around your fruit tree, but this baby's worth it. Two other things you want to consider are power lines above and underground. So I say it's important to always call before you dig. Call 811 and they will send somebody out relatively quickly to determine if there are any kinds of cables or power lines underneath where you're planning on planting your tree. You also need to check for power lines above. In my presentation later, I'll talk about how tall fruit trees grow, but some fruit trees do grow tall enough that they will grow into your power lines, which just is going to invite a big mess for you or Georgia Power to deal with later. And the last thing to consider is your proximity to your street. A lot of people like to plant fruit trees sort of at the entrance to their house. It's sort of like a nice, warm, sunny, delicious way to welcome people. But you also have to remember that that means that people walking by may pick your fruit. And the average apple tree makes up to 500 pounds of apples, so it's probably okay if your neighbors pick a few apples here and there. You should always ask permission before you pick someone else's fruit trees, but we can't guarantee that everyone's going to do that. So you just need to know that sometimes you will lose a little bit to neighbors and other folks who come past and pick your fruit. The other thing is dogs. Dogs will definitely pee on your baby tree, which is not healthy in any circumstance, no matter how much consent is given. So please consider that. It might not be the best starting point for your tree to get peed on a bunch of times when it's just young and starting to get adjusted to the place in which you've planted it. So now we're going to move on to talking about how to plant your tree once you've just agreed upon the site, you've decided it's good, safe, healthy, it's got all the right factors for you. Let's talk about what you do when you've actually got your fruit tree. So this here is not a fruit tree. It's a beautiful dogwood tree. Thanks to Trees Atlanta for supplying this tree. Oftentimes the trees will maybe not be in big pots quite as big as this, especially if you get your fruit tree at the Alfie Fruit Tree Sale on January 23rd. A lot of them will be bare root, which means they will look more like this. They'll have just, it'll be kind of like a stick with roots coming off of it, which is totally fine. It doesn't look like a lot, but it totally will grow into a healthy, beautiful, productive fruit tree. But when they come in pots, this is a really great way to determine how big the hole should be. So you want to dig a hole that is twice the diameter of the pot and is as deep as where the soil is inside of the pot. So I'm going to go ahead and start digging this hole so you can see what it looks like. So the last thing you want to do when digging the hole for your fruit tree is you want to carve out little divots on the side so you can kind of be breaking the ground on the side, so it's easier for the roots to go ahead and start tapping into the sides of the hole and spreading out. So you just take little chunks out of the side. Really it's just sort of a little divot. I just like to stab the soil and take out little divots on the side like that. And then you'll take your tree. I'm not going to actually take this one out of the pot, but you'll take the tree, put it in the hole, and you will cover it up just basically right to basically covering the soil that it came on. And that's all you want to do because there's a lot of important growth that's happening right here and you don't want to suffocate that. And that's your tree planted in the soil. Something I like to do once I've got it kind of buried and back in the soil is I may hoe around the sides to get some of this grass out of the way, because the grass will be competing with your tree to soak up water and to soak up any kind of nutrients. So once you have the tree planted and in the hole, you need to start thinking about how you're going to care for it. So once you've got the area hoed around your tree, I would say probably about a 5-foot diameter, you are going to want to mulch all around the tree. So I like to spread a layer pretty thick, thicker than you think, maybe like 3 inches of mulch all around the tree. This is also going to help to keep the weed pressure off of your tree, and you can kind of build up the sides into little mounds so you can create a reservoir to hold water. So the way that would work is it would be sort of, your 2 or 3 inch layer of mulch, and then sort of building up into a taller hill that goes around the tree like a donut. And that way that will create a little lip and it can hold water for the tree whenever it rains or whenever you water it. And so the way that you want to water this tree is about 3 times a week, a gallon of water a week. Like I mentioned before, if your tree is out of sight, out of mind, you may want to use something like a bucket or a gator bag that can hold water and slowly release it back into the tree. So what I would do is drill holes, 2 or 3 holes into the bottom of a bucket, and then fill it, 3 gallons of water, and then just let it sit by your tree, and it'll slowly release back into the soil as the soil is drying out. But of course, if you have a hose and you can just water it with a hose, you can basically come back out here and fill your donut of water and let it go. And then once you see that the donut is empty, you can come back out and water. Or you can do the soil test like I told you about earlier with your trowel and squeezing the soil to see if it's staying in place. And if it's staying in place, the soil is wet enough. But if it's not staying in place and it's all crumbly, that means you need to go ahead and water again. So the last few things you need to do when you're thinking about tree care is don't fertilize. A lot of people think, oh, I just planted this tree, I want to give it as much food to get it started and be healthy. The tree is undergoing a lot of shock right now, and adding fertilizer would just be an extra amount of shock that this poor baby does not deserve. So leave it for the year, let it be fine, let it just grow, see how it establishes, see how it adjusts to the ecosystem that it lives in. And then come next year, you can plant, or you can sprinkle about 1/8 of a cup of fertilizer around the tree. There's a lot of really awesome organic fertilizers, or you can just use compost. And I would just do a thin layer, like a 1/2 inch at most, of compost kind of around that donut shape in order to fertilize your tree. The best time to plant your fruit trees is when it's cold outside and everything's going dormant. So we recommend November through March. If March stays cold, is a great time to plant your fruit tree. That way it's not putting out its leaves like this and not focused on growing outside. It's really just storing its energy. So you need to be patient with your fruit tree. It takes about 3 to 5 years for your tree to really start upping its fruit production. So the next few years are really just about you kind of keeping an eye out for it, making sure that it's watered, doing a fertilizer once a year. And then in 3 years, you can go ahead and start to expect that you'll be able to pick fruit. And in 5 years, you may have more fruit than you know what to do with. So you can always call Concrete Jungle. We are always happy to come out and pick fruit. Anything you have to spare is definitely much, much needed in the city. I also recommend you teaming up with your neighbors and all of y'all talking about what fruit trees you'd like to plant in your yard. That way that you can mix and match and share different types of fruit. So don't forget, the Alfie Fruit Tree Sale is on January 23rd, and that's a great place to buy fruit trees, and all of the profits go back to the Alfie Orchard Project, which is planting community orchards at schools, parks, community groups all around the city. So that's it for me. I'm Catherine from Concrete Jungle, and I'm going back to where I belong.